Listen, that sound, rain hitting a thatched roof, hour after hour, without a single break. Not a storm that passes in an afternoon, not a shower that clears by evening, just rain. Falling since before dawn, falling long after dark.
Picture a small house at the edge of a field, its walls made of mud and woven sticks, its roof straining under water it was never built to hold. Inside, a family sits close to a fire that refuses to properly catch, because even the firewood is damp all the way through. Smoke curls upward and stalls at the smoke hole, pushed back down by the wet air outside. A mother wrings water from a child's shirt that will not fully dry. Not this week, maybe not this month. Outside, past the low doorway, a field that should be turning gold with grain lies flat and gray under standing water. And somewhere in that house, someone is doing the math. How many days of grain are left in the storage loft? How many days of rain still to come? Nobody knows the answer to either question. This was not one bad afternoon. For some, it was weeks. For others, it stretched into years. And somehow, they survived it. Introduction. We live in a world where weather is an inconvenience, a delayed flight, a ruined picnic, something we complain about and then forget. For most of human history, weather was not an inconvenience. It was the entire foundation everything else stood on. Break that foundation, and there was no backup plan waiting behind it. No trucks bringing grain from somewhere drier. No warehouse of frozen reserves. Just what was in the ground and what was already stored. So when the sky simply refused to clear, something had to give. The clearest version of this story comes from early 14th century Europe. In the spring of 1315, rain began falling across much of the continent, and it did not stop. People who lived through it described it as rain unlike anything anyone could remember, day after day, as if the sky itself had turned against them. It kept falling through the summer. It came back in 1316. It returned again in 1317.
3 growing seasons, 3 failures, one after another. This became known as the Great Famine, but it's more than a date in a textbook. It's a story about what happens to ordinary people, real families, real children, real fear when the sky simply won't cooperate. And it's not the only story like it, because on the other side of the world, other people were learning to live with rain that never seemed to end either, just in a very different way. Inside the storm. Start with the house itself, because that's where the story really lives. Picture the frame first. Curved timber beams, cut from trees, arched together to hold up a roof. Around them, walls built from wattle and daub. Sticks woven tight, packed with a mixture of mud, straw, and manure, left to dry into something surprisingly strong. It kept out wind. It kept out cold. For a while, it even kept out water. The roof was thatch, bundle after bundle of straw or reed, layered thick, tied down by hand. When it was fresh, it shed rain beautifully. Water simply ran off the way it's supposed to. But thatch ages, and rain, given enough time, finds every weakness. So picture the moment it happens. A single drop finds a gap, then another. Soon, there's a steady drip landing in the same spot on the floor, over and over. And somebody has already placed a bowl beneath it because this has happened before, and it will happen again before the roof can be properly repaired. Inside, the floor is packed earth. Under the constant assault of rain finding its way in, that earth goes from firm to soft, to something closer to mud. And here's a detail that rarely makes it into the history books. The animals often lived inside too. A cow, some pigs, in the same single room as the family, especially in the wet season, especially when it was too dangerous or too miserable to leave them exposed outside. So imagine that room. Damp straw underfoot, the smell of wet animals and wet wood mixing with wood smoke, cold air slipping in under a door built too low and too narrow to keep much of anything else out. This wasn't a special hardship reserved for the unlucky. This was simply what a very wet season felt like for almost everyone. When the fields went under. Now picture the field. A farmer stands at its edge at first light, and what he sees stops him cold. Wheat, lying flat, not from wind, from water. The ground beneath it has taken in more rain than it can hold, and now it simply sits there, a shallow lake where a harvest should be growing. There is nothing to do about this. No pump, no drainage system built for a disaster this size. Just standing and looking and understanding exactly what it means. Because grain that sits cold and wet doesn't ripen, it rots where it stands. And it wasn't only the grain. Hay needed sun to cure into fodder for the winter, and there was no sun to be had. Wet hay doesn't dry, it rots. And rotten hay cannot feed a cow through a long winter. So the animals began to weaken too, vulnerable now to disease. And in the worst hit regions, herds collapsed by shocking numbers. Here's where the story gets harder to sit with. Roads turned to rivers of mud, swallowing carts whole. Bridges gave way. Villages built too close to rivers found the water arriving at their doorsteps. Then inside them, grain that might have been shipped from a drier region simply couldn't get through in time. And when food ran short everywhere at once, prices for bread and grain and salt climbed to numbers ordinary families could not reach. Picture one family in this moment. A father sitting in the doorway of his home, staring at a flooded field he has worked his entire life, saying nothing because there is nothing left to say. Behind him, a child tugs at his sleeve and asks the only question that matters to her. When will it stop raining? He doesn't answer. He doesn't know. That single, quiet moment, a father with no answer, a child still hoping there is one, is, in many ways, the whole story of the Great Famine. Historians estimate that in the hardest hit towns, somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 4 did not survive what followed. Some families ate the seed grain meant for next year's planting, buying a few weeks of survival at the cost of next year's harvest. Others turned to animals never meant for the table. Trust between neighbors in some places began to fray. How the world answered back. But here's the question worth asking. If the rain was the same everywhere, why did some places suffer more than others? Because not every culture built its life the same way. Thousands of miles away, in the river valleys and floodplains of South and Southeast Asia, entire societies had already spent centuries learning to live with water that came, without fail, every single year. Instead of fighting the flood, they built around it. Homes raised on wooden or bamboo stilts, lifted clear above the rising water. Rice, bred and selected over generations, specifically because it could survive submerged fields. Storage granaries built up on posts, keeping grain dry even when the ground beneath them disappeared underwater. For these communities, a flood wasn't a catastrophe waiting to happen. It was simply the season. It had a rhythm, and life had learned to move with that rhythm rather than against it. Back in Europe, that kind of generational preparation for prolonged, disastrous rain simply didn't exist because a wet spring was normal, but 3 ruined years in a row was almost unthinkable, which means survival in the end came down to 2 very different things. The wisdom built over centuries in places where floods were expected, and something more improvised, more desperate in places where they were not. Holding on. And yet, even here, in the middle of disaster, people found ways to endure. Grain reserves held by monasteries and manors were opened, rationed carefully, stretched as far as they possibly could go. Neighbors who still had something shared it with neighbors who had nothing, understanding, even without saying it aloud, that everyone's survival was now tied together. Families patched their roofs the moment a leak appeared, dug small channels around their homes to steer water away from their doors, and pulled together whatever the fields hadn't ruined. And knowledge passed down from parents who had lived through earlier years mattered more than almost anything else. Which fields drained fastest, which grain might still survive in soaked soil, how to make a dwindling store of food last 1 more week and then 1 more after that. Eventually, slowly, without warning, the way these things often end, the rain stopped. The 1317 harvest was still poor, but it was enough to begin turning things around.
Full recovery would take years longer, but it came. Reflection. What feels like a minor inconvenience to us today, a rained-out weekend, a delayed commute, was, for these families, something closer to a countdown. It's easy to forget how directly human survival was once tied to the sky above. The people who lived through the Great Famine were not less capable than we are. They were not less clever. They simply lived in a world with almost no margin for error and very few tools to correct one once it appeared. What carried them wasn't luck alone. It was shared grain stores. It was a father rethatching a roof for the third time that season. It was a neighbor who gave away food he couldn't really spare. It was knowledge passed hand to hand, year to year, refusing to be forgotten. Perhaps the most sobering thing of all is this. The rain itself wasn't unnatural. It was simply weather, ordinary, familiar weather that refused to stop. The disaster wasn't the rain. The disaster was a world with no room left to absorb it. Conclusion. Somewhere in that small, smoke-filled house, a father once sat and stared at water where his harvest should have been, and a child once asked when it would stop raining. He didn't have an answer that day. But the rain did stop. Eventually, it always did. And people, in the quiet, mud-soaked aftermath, picked up what was left and began again, the way people always have, and perhaps always will. If you had been in that doorway, watching your future disappear under gray water, do you think you would have found a way through? Would you have known which detail to fix first? The roof, the field, or the fear? We'll never fully know how many small, unrecorded acts of endurance stood between survival and disaster during those years, but they were there, quiet, unremarkable, and absolutely essential. Tell us in the comments what part of this story stayed with you the most. And if you want to keep stepping into the past with us, join us for the next episode of How They Lived.